My name is Cora Whitfield, and I am 19 years old. 4 months ago, my father sat across from me at a diner table with a manila envelope and a pen and told me that signing a single piece of paper would keep our family together. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed, carefully, with the right amount of warmth tucked underneath the pressure. I did not sign. Because 6 months before that conversation, I had been cleaning out my grandmother's farmhouse alone on a Saturday afternoon, and I had pulled open the bottom drawer of the old pine dresser in the back bedroom, the drawer that always stuck, and I had found something taped to the underside of it. A key, small, brass, old, and a note in my grandmother's handwriting, 3 lines on a torn piece of lined paper. Cora, the box is in the barn, top shelf, behind the seed canisters. Do not let anyone rush you. You will know when I stood in that room for a long time, holding a key that weighed almost nothing, understanding that my grandmother had placed it there for me to find. Not my father, not his wife. Me, the one she knew would clean the drawer instead of emptying the room with a rental truck. Before I tell you what was in the box and what it meant and what happened the morning my father realized I was not going to sign anything, I need to take you back to where this story actually begins. If you're new here, welcome to Stillwater's Drama. Please take a moment to subscribe and hit like if this kind of story speaks to you. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to Harlan County. Whitfield Farm sits on 63 acres of rolling pasture land in Harlan County, 11 miles outside of a town called Crestwood. The farmhouse itself is white with green shutters, a wraparound porch that lists slightly to the east, and a kitchen so warm in winter that the windows fog up when you boil water for tea. My great-grandfather built the house in 1947. My grandfather, Earl Whitfield, was born in that house. He died in it too, in 2018, in the bedroom facing the old oak tree, the way he always said he would. I am telling you this so you understand that the farm is not just land. It is not acreage on a tax document. It is 63 acres of a family's entire history, pressed into soil that has been worked by the same hands for 3 generations. My grandmother, Ruth Whitfield, ran that farm alone after Earl died. She was 71 years old, and she did not slow down. She kept the vegetable garden, maintained the fence line, drove the old tractor herself until her hip made it impossible, and then hired a neighbor's son to drive it while she supervised from the fence with a cup of coffee and a very clear opinion about his technique. She was that kind of woman. The kind who knows exactly what she has and exactly what it is worth and will not be moved from either. My father, Dennis Whitfield, is her only child. I am his only child from his first marriage to my mother, Carol, who left when I was 6 and lives in Tucson now, with a man named Phil. My father remarried when I was 11. Her name is Belinda. I want to be fair about Belinda. She was not unkind to me. She was not cruel. She was something perhaps harder to name, which is pleasant in the way that a hotel is pleasant. Comfortable, functional, impersonal. She called me sweetheart in the first year, and then largely stopped. She had 2 children from her first marriage, Tyler, who was 13 when she and my father married, and Amber, who was 9. They lived with us full-time. I lived with us full-time and felt, most of the time, like a guest who had overstayed without anyone quite saying so. My father is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that too. He is a man who loves ease more than he loves difficult things, and people like that are not evil. They are just dangerous in specific circumstances, and one of those circumstances is when money is involved and someone more determined than they are is standing beside them with a plan. Belinda is determined. That is the fairest word I have for her. I spent every summer of my childhood at Whitfield Farm. This is the part of the story that made everything else possible because without those summers, I would not have known what I was protecting. And if I had not known what I was protecting, I might have signed the paper. My grandmother taught me things that no one else in my life thought to teach me. How to read a pasture for drainage problems, which fence posts were original and which had been replaced, and why the difference mattered. How to look at a seed catalog and understand what the soil in Harlan County would and would not support. How to keep records, every expense, every yield, every repair, in a ledger she kept in the kitchen drawer. I'm going to tell you one specific afternoon because it is the one I come back to most. I was 13. It was August. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the light go flat across the back pasture, the way it does in August when the heat finally lifts around 7 o'clock. My grandmother had a glass of sweet tea and I had one too, and neither of us was saying anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Then she put down her glass and looked at me sideways and said, "Cora, do you know what this farm is worth?" I said, "Not exactly." She said, "In dollars? Right now, a developer would pay somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million, depending on who was asking and how badly they wanted it." She said it the same way she would have said the weather forecast. "Just a fact." I said, "That is a lot of money, Grandma." She said, "It is." And that is exactly the problem. The moment something is worth that much money, everybody who ever shook your hand starts remembering how close they are to you. I did not fully understand what she meant at 13. I was starting to. Then she said, "This farm stays in the family, Cora, not because of sentiment, because sentiment fades and paper does not. I am making sure of that." I thought she was speaking generally. She was not. She was telling me as clearly as she knew how to tell a 13-year-old exactly what she had already put in motion. I just would not understand it for 6 more years. My grandfather died in 2018. My grandmother died in the spring of my senior year of high school, a Tuesday in March, a stroke that took her quickly, which she would have preferred. She was specific about most things, and she had been specific about that too, more than once. "I do not want to linger," she used to say. "I want to go the way the lights go out, fast and without ceremony." She got her wish. I was 17 when she died. I drove to the farm the day after the funeral, alone because I needed to be there. My father and Belinda had been there the day of, long enough to walk through the house, and then they had driven back to our house in the city. 40 minutes each way. I noticed they did not stay long. I noticed Belinda had her phone out, photographing rooms. I stayed for the whole weekend. I watered the garden. I fed the 2 barn cats my grandmother kept, Tally and Fig, who would need to be rehomed now and who seemed to already know it from the way they moved through the empty house. I opened windows to air the place out. I made the bed in the back bedroom with the quilt my grandmother had made herself from fabric squares she saved for 30 years. And I started that weekend to understand the shape of what was coming. My father called me Sunday evening as I was driving home. His voice was careful, the kind of careful that means someone has been talking to someone else. He said, "Belinda and I have been discussing the farm." I waited. He said, "It is a significant asset, Cora. Property taxes alone are not nothing, and maintaining 63 acres without someone living there full time is going to be a challenge." I said, "I can be there on weekends." He said, "You are 17. I said, "I will be 18 in 4 months. He paused. He said, "We will talk more once things settle." I hung up and drove the rest of the way home in the dark, thinking about what settle meant. It meant once we figure out our plan. The first conversation happened 3 weeks after my grandmother's death. Belinda was the one who raised it, at dinner. The way she raised things she had already decided, framed as an open question with a foregone conclusion built into the framing. She said, "Have you all thought about what makes sense to do with Ruth's property?" My father looked at his plate, then at me. We are still figuring that out. Belinda said, "I only ask because I spoke with a man at my office whose brother is in land development. He said farmland in Harlan County is getting a lot of attention right now." Good timing might matter. Timing. There it was. I said Grandma wanted the farm to stay in the family. Belinda smiled the way she smiled when she was about to disagree with me politely. She said, "Of course. But what does staying in the family look like practically? Your dad cannot run it. You're going to college." I had not said I was going to college. I had not decided anything yet. But she had already decided for me. I said, "I think we should wait until we know what the will says." Belinda looked at my father. My father looked at his water glass. The will was straightforward, as far as any of us knew at the time. My grandmother had an estate attorney named Walter Greer, who had handled her affairs for 20 years. He called my father the week after the funeral to schedule a reading. My father did not tell me about the appointment. I found out from Walter Greer's office when they called the house to confirm the time, and I answered the phone. I called Walter Greer back myself and asked if I needed to be present. He paused for just a moment, which is the kind of pause that contains information. Then he said, "Yes, I would strongly recommend it." The reading was on a Thursday. My father was surprised to see me there. He covered it quickly, put his arm around my shoulder, said, of course you should be here." Belinda had come too. She sat to my father's left in a chair she had pulled slightly closer to his than the spacing in the room suggested. Walter Greer was in his 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of deliberate slowness that is not age but precision. He read the will in full. I will give you the summary. My grandmother left the farmhouse, the 63 acres, all structures, including the barn and the equipment shed, and all personal property within the farmhouse to me. Cora Ruth Whitfield, her granddaughter, not her son, me. She left my father a sum of $40,000 from a savings account, which was not nothing, and a specific set of items, her husband's tools, a pocket watch, and the kitchen table that had been in the family since 1962. She left him things that meant something. She left me the thing that meant everything. There was a stipulation. Because I was 17 at the time of her death, the property would be held in trust until my 18th birthday, at which point I would assume full ownership. Walter Greer was named trustee. The trust was irrevocable. The room was quiet when he finished reading. My father said, "She left the farm to Cora." Walter said, "Yes." My father said, "Not to me." Walter said, "Your mother was very clear in her instructions." Belinda said nothing. She was looking at a point on the wall just past Walter Greer's left ear. I had seen that expression before. It was the expression she wore when she was recalculating. On the drive home, my father did not speak for the first 20 minutes. Then he said, "I do not understand why she did it this way." I said, "She loved you, Dad. She left you things that mattered to her." He said, "The farm mattered to her." I said, "Yes, that is why she left it to me." He looked at me sideways. It was not a hostile look. It was something more confused. Like a man who has always assumed a certain outcome and is only now realizing the assumption was never guaranteed. The 4 months between the will reading and my 18th birthday were the longest 4 months of my life. Not because of what was said, because of what was not. My father stopped talking to me about the farm directly. The conversations shifted. He started asking how I was doing, how school was going, whether I had thought about what I wanted to do after graduation. Warm questions, attentive questions, the kind a parent asks when they are paying attention. I should have been glad of it. I was not, because I knew the timing. Belinda was friendlier too. She started leaving things on my desk, magazine articles about sustainable farming, a book about young women running agricultural businesses, a printed web page about farm management degree programs at the state university. She was building a story where I would go to college and need someone to look after the farm in the meantime, someone responsible, someone already in the family. I started paying attention in a different way. I kept a notebook, nothing dramatic, just dates and observations. What was said, by whom, in front of whom. I have always been a person who keeps notes. My grandmother taught me that too. "Write it down, Cora." She used to say, "Memory is kind to everyone except the person who needs it to be accurate." In November, 2 months before my birthday, I was at the farm on a Saturday doing what I had been doing every weekend since my grandmother died, maintaining it, checking the fence line, running water through the pipes so they would not freeze, keeping the barn cats fed, though Tally had already found a new home with the neighbor across the road and only Fig remained, a large orange cat who had apparently decided the barn was his and was not interested in any alternative arrangements. I was clearing out the back bedroom, not stripping it, just organizing. My grandmother had lived in that room for 50 years, and there were layers to it, not clutter. She was not a cluttered woman, but depth, a life arranged with intention. The pine dresser was in the corner, old, heavy. The bottom drawer had always stuck. I pulled it all the way out to unstick it, and when I turned it over to check the runner, I saw the old tape, the kind that yellows and dries at the edges. a small brass key flat against the underside of the drawer, and next to it, folded twice into a square, a piece of lined paper. My grandmother's handwriting, 3 lines, Cora. The box is in the barn top shelf, behind the seed canisters. Do not let anyone rush you. You will know when. I sat on the floor of that bedroom for several minutes with the key in my palm. Fig came in from the hallway and sat down next to me and regarded me with the calm authority of a cat who has seen many things and is not impressed by most of them. My grandmother had put this here for me to find. She had calculated that I would be the one cleaning the back bedroom. She had calculated that I would pull that drawer out all the way because she knew I was thorough. She had hidden a key and a note months or years before she died, and she had trusted me to find it at the right time. I held the key. I looked at the note. I read it 3 more times. Do not let anyone rush you. She knew even before she died that someone would try. The barn was cold. November in Harlan County is a serious month, and the barn held the cold the way old wood does, all the way through to the inside. Fig followed me out and sat in the barn door in the patch of thin sun as if he was supervising. The top shelf was high. I needed the step ladder, the one my grandfather had built from scrap lumber and which was absolutely not rated for any weight, but had been in that barn for 30 years and would probably outlast us all. Behind the seed canisters, which were old metal tins my grandmother used for buckwheat and millet that she had mostly stopped growing 5 years before she died, but never got around to discarding, there was a metal box. Green, the kind of fireproof lockbox you buy at a hardware store. The key fit. Inside, 4 documents, a smaller envelope, and a folded letter. The 4 documents were the important ones. The first was a deed, the deed to Whitfield Farm, all 63 acres, all structures, in my grandmother's name, standard, what I expected. The second was something I had not expected, a second deed, signed and notarized 2 years before her death. A transfer on death deed, sometimes called a beneficiary deed, a legal instrument in our state that allows property to pass directly to a named beneficiary upon the owner's death. Outside of probate, outside of a will without any required waiting period. The beneficiary named on that deed was me, Cora Ruth Whitfield. The deed had been prepared by an attorney whose name I did not recognize. Not Walter Greer, a different attorney, a woman named Sandra Park, whose office was in the county seat. It had been recorded at the Harlan County Clerk's office on the date shown at the bottom. It was a public record. It had been sitting at the county clerk's office for 2 years. The deed in the will was a formality, a statement of intent that matched the legal reality. The transfer on death deed was the mechanism, the actual legal instrument. The property had already transferred to me the moment my grandmother died, not when I turned 18, not after probate. The moment she died, the farm became mine. I read that document 3 times. Then I sat on a hay bale in my grandmother's cold barn and I understood, all at once, the full shape of what she had done. She had not just left me the farm, she had made it impossible to take. The third document was a letter from Sandra Park explaining the deed in plain language and noting that a copy was on file at her office, that the recording at the county clerk's was also on file, and that upon my grandmother's death, I should contact her at any time. The fourth document was an insurance document, the farm's property insurance, with my name added as a co-insured 2 years prior. And the envelope. Inside it, another key. This one with a tag. The tag read, Safe Deposit Box, First Farmers Bank, Crestwood, Box 114. I did not open that one yet. I folded the documents carefully. I put them back in the lockbox. I put the lockbox in the trunk of my car under the spare tire, and I drove home. I called Sandra Park from my car, parked in the driveway, before I went inside. She picked up on the second ring. It was a Saturday, but she picked up. I told her my name. She said, I have been wondering when you would call. Your grandmother said you would find it when you were ready. I told her what I had found. She confirmed it. The transfer on death deed had been recorded in Harlan County 2 years before my grandmother's death, when she was of full legal capacity and represented by independent counsel, meaning Sandra Park, herself. Not my grandmother's usual estate attorney. My grandmother had deliberately used a separate attorney, a woman my father and Belinda had never met and would not think to look for. Sandra said, "The farm transferred to you upon your grandmother's death. There is no probate requirement for the deed. There is no waiting period. You are the legal owner of Whitfield Farm as of the date she passed." I said, "My father does not know this." She said, "Your grandmother did not tell him. That was her decision." I sat with that. Then I said, "Is there anything they can do to contest it?" Sandra said, "A transfer on death deed executed by a competent adult and properly recorded is extremely difficult to contest. Your grandmother had her physician document her cognitive capacity at the time of signing. She was thorough." "Yes," I said, "she was." Sandra gave me a number to call if anyone took action against the property. She told me about the safe deposit box. She said it contained the original recorded deed, a copy of the physician's letter, and one more document she would let my grandmother explain herself. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in the driveway for another few minutes. Then I went inside and ate dinner and said nothing. If you have ever held information that you could not yet share, not because you were being deceptive, but because the timing was not right and the wrong timing would cost everything. You know what the next 3 months felt like? I went to school. I did my work. I drove to the farm every weekend and maintained it. My father was attentive and warm in the way that told me the plan was still building in the background. Belinda smiled at me across the dinner table and occasionally mentioned property management companies she had looked up. Just as an idea, just something to consider. I went to First Farmers Bank in Crestwood, the week after I found the box. I showed them my ID, the key, and the copy of my grandmother's authorization naming me as an authorized box holder. They let me in without any difficulty. The safe deposit box held exactly what Sandra had said: the original recorded deed, the physician's letter, and a sealed envelope with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. I did not open the letter there. I carried it home to the farm and sat on the porch and opened it with my grandmother's barn at my back and 63 acres in front of me. She wrote 3 pages, long for her. She was not a woman who used more words than a thing required. But she had things to say and she said them. She told me about the farm, not the history. She had already given me that in person over years of summers. She told me about why she chose to do it the way she did it. She wrote, "I know Dennis loves this place. But love and stewardship are different things. Dennis loves it the way you love something you grew up with. You love it the way you love something you intend to tend." She told me that when my grandfather died, she had worried for a year about what would happen to the farm after her. She had watched how my father handled the $40,000 his own father had left him, which was not carefully. She had watched Belinda from a careful distance and understood what Belinda was and was not. She wrote, "Belinda is not a bad person. She is a practical person, and practical people will always choose what is practical. That is not someone I can trust with this land." She told me about Sandra Park. She said she had chosen Sandra because Sandra did not know my father and could not be charmed or pressured by him. She said she had recorded the deed on a Tuesday in October of the year she signed it, and had filed the box at the bank the following Saturday, and had placed the key under the drawer the following Saturday. She wrote, "I have been waiting for you to find it. I thought about telling you directly, but you are the kind of person who needs to find a thing herself to fully believe it. So I left it where you would look." She was right. That is exactly what I am. The last paragraph. I want to share it because it is the reason I did not feel alone in any of what came after. She wrote, "This farm is not just land. It is proof that ordinary people can build something that lasts. Your great-grandfather built it with lumber he cut himself and a foundation he mixed by hand. Your grandfather kept it through 2 droughts and 1 year when the markets made us wonder if we should give up. I kept it after he was gone. Now it is yours. Take care of it the way we took care of each other. And if anyone tries to tell you it is not worth the trouble, show them the porch and ask them to watch the sun come up over the east pasture." Nobody says that after. I folded the letter. I put it in the fireproof box. I drove home. I was ready. My father called a family meeting on a Sunday in January, 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. Family meeting? That was the phrase he used. He sent a text to all of us, me, Tyler, and Amber, asking us to be home for dinner on Sunday because he had something he wanted to discuss as a family. Tyler was 20 by then and living at home while he figured out his next move. Amber was 16. Neither of them knew what this was about, as far as I could tell. I sat at the dinner table and listened. My father had prepared what he said to some length. He talked about the farm, about the costs of maintaining it, about property taxes, about the practicality of 63 acres sitting empty with no one to run it. He talked about a developer who had reached out, a company called Harlan Land Partners, who was interested in the property at a number he described as very strong. He said, "Cora, I know Grandma Ruth wanted you to have the farm, and you will. We are not talking about cutting you out. We are talking about a family decision that benefits everyone." I said, "How much?" He said, "They have offered $950,000 for the full 63 acres. Belinda, sitting across from me, added, "Split fairly. That is a very strong foundation for your future, Cora." College, a home, a real start, I said. I see. Tyler was looking at the table, Amber was looking at me. She was 16 and she was sharp, and I could see her reading the room with the particular acuity of a teenager who has learned to read rooms. I said, "I need to think about it." My father visibly relaxed. He said, "Of course. Take your time. We just wanted to put it on the table as a family." The next morning, he put it on the table with a pen. He came into the kitchen before school with the manila envelope. He sat down across from me while I was eating breakfast and slid it across the table. He said, "I had an attorney put together a consent to sale. Just a formality so we can move things forward once you turn 18. No rush on signing. Just when you're ready." I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. I said, "I will read it." He said, "Of course. And Cora, I want you to know this is the right thing for everyone. Grandma would want you taken care of." He left for work. I did not open the envelope. I put it in my school bag and I called Sandra Park on my lunch break. She told me what I expected. The consent to sale was meaningless. You cannot sign away what someone else does not co-own. I was already the sole legal owner of Whitfield Farm. My father had no ownership interest to sell, consent to, or transfer. The document was either drafted by an attorney who had not checked the title, which would be negligence, or drafted by someone who knew and was hoping I did not. She said, "Cora, if they attempt to sell or encumber this property, any title search will show the transfer on death deed recorded in your name. No legitimate title company will close on this sale without your signature as the owner of record." I said, "What if they find a title company that is not legitimate?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Then we file an injunction, and we also have grounds for fraud. But I do not think it will come to that. Once they run the title, they will see the deed." I said, "When will they run the title?" She said, "Typically when they get serious with a buyer, when they start drafting a purchase agreement." I said, "They already have a buyer." A pause. Then, "Cora, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Sandra's instructions were specific. I want to walk you through them because precision is what saved everything. First, do not sign anything, not the consent to sale. Not any document my father or his attorney presented, not anything related to the farm. Second, on the morning of my 18th birthday, I was to contact the Harlan County Clerk's office and request a certified copy of the transfer on death deed already on record in my name. This was public record. Anyone could pull it. We wanted to make sure I had a certified copy in hand. Third, she was going to send a letter, certified mail, to Harlan Land Partners, informing them that the property of record for Whitfield Farm was held under a recorded beneficiary deed in the name of Cora Ruth Whitfield, that any purchase agreement entered into with any other party regarding this property would be invalid, and that her client was prepared to file for injunctive relief if any attempt was made to close a sale. She sent the letter on a Monday. On Thursday, she received a call back from the developer's attorney. She called me after that call. She said they ran the title. They found the deed. Their attorney is furious with whoever told them the title was clear. I said, "What did they say?" She said, "They are withdrawing from the transaction with your father." They also asked for your contact information directly in case you ever wanted to discuss a sale. I said, "What did you tell them?" She said that you were not interested at this time. I said, "Thank you." She said, "You are welcome. Your grandmother did excellent work, Cora. I just followed the plan she put in place." My father found out on a Saturday. I know this because I was at the farm when he called. I was on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the east pasture in the early light, the way my grandmother's letter had told me to watch it, and my phone rang. His voice was tight, not shouting. My father rarely shouted. Tight, like something being held under pressure. He said, "Cora, what did you do?" I said, "I did not do anything, Dad. Grandma did it." He said, "A lawyer contacted Harlan Land Partners. They pulled out." I said, "They pulled out because when they ran the title, they found out the farm was already in my name. It has been in my name since the day Grandma died. That is what a transfer on death deed does." Silence, he said. "I did not know about any deed." I said, "I know." He said, "Your grandmother did this without telling me." I said, "Yes." The line was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing. I could hear underneath the anger the shape of something else. Not grief? Not exactly. More like the particular ache of a man who has just understood that the person he loved most in his life knew something about him that he did not want known and accounted for it and left him behind. He said, "She chose you over her own son." I said, "She chose the person she trusted to take care of it. She loved you, Dad. She left you things that mattered to her. She just knew what you would do with the farm if she left it to you." A very long silence. He said, "I want to contest this." I said, "You can try?" But the deed was prepared by independent counsel and recorded 2 years before she died. She had her doctor document that she was of sound mind. Sandra Park has the physician's letter. "You would spend more on attorneys than the farm is worth, and you would lose." He said, "This is not right." I said, "Selling something that did not belong to you without telling me is not right either." He hung up. I want to stop here, because I know what you're thinking, or some of you are thinking it, which is, were not you angry? Did not you want to say more? Did not you want to list everything he had done and make sure he understood each piece of it? I was angry. Of course I was angry. My father had sat across from me at a dinner table and told me a third of my own farm was a generous offer. He had slid a document across a kitchen table with a pen and called it a formality. He had used the word family, the way people use the word family when they mean compliance. But I had also sat on that porch and read my grandmother's letter. And she had not written a single word of bitterness about her own son. She had not needed to make anyone a villain. She had just made sure the land was safe. I tried to be like that. It did not always work, but I tried. Belinda called the following Tuesday. My father did not call. Belinda called. Her voice was different from what I expected. Not angry, tired. The kind of tired that comes when a plan you worked on for a long time comes apart, and there is nothing left to do but acknowledge it. She said, "Cora, I want to be honest with you." I said, "Okay." She said, "We needed that money. Your dad's business has not been doing well. The mortgage is behind. We were counting on the sale." I said, "I know." She said, "We should have talked to you differently." She paused. "I should have. I knew from the beginning you were not going to want to sell. And instead of having that conversation honestly, we tried to manage you. And I'm sorry for that." I did not say anything for a moment. She said, "I am not asking you to sell. I understand you're not going to sell. I am just telling you that I know how we handled it was wrong." I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "What happens now?" I said, "I do not know yet, but I'm not selling the farm." She said, "I know." We hung up. It was not reconciliation. It was something smaller and more honest. An acknowledgement from both of us of what had happened. That was something Tyler knocked on my bedroom door that evening. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, not quite looking at me. He said, "I did not know about any of it. The meeting, the buyer, none of it." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have asked more questions." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I am sorry, Cora." He was 20 years old and he was genuinely sorry, and that was enough for me. I said, "It is okay, Ty." Amber was different. Amber came to my room 2 days later and sat on my desk chair without asking and said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "If you needed the money, would you sell it?" I thought about that, honestly. I said, "I do not know. Maybe, but I do not need the money right now, and I am not going to sell something that was given to me in trust to protect it." She said, "In trust? Like a legal trust," I said. "No, I mean given to me to be the person who takes care of it, like a responsibility." She looked at me for a moment. She said, "I think your grandma was right to pick you. 16 years old." She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I said, "Thank you, Amber." She took a granola bar off my desk and left. I stared at the ceiling for a while. The weeks after were quiet in the particular way that things are quiet after a storm has moved through. Not peaceful, not yet, just still. My father and I did not speak for 11 days. When we finally did, it was a Saturday morning. He came downstairs while I was in the kitchen and poured himself coffee and stood at the counter and looked out the window for a long time. He said, "I want to understand something." I waited. He said, "Did she tell you? Before she died?" I said, "Not directly. She left things for me to find." He said, "She planned it." I said, "Yes." He was quiet. He stared at his coffee. He said, "I grew up on that farm, Cora. I know every inch of it." I said, "I know." He said, "She still chose you." I said, "She knew I would stay." Dad, that is the difference. You would have sold it. Not because you do not love it, because you needed the money and the farm was there. She needed to know it would still be there. The only way to know that was to give it to someone who would not sell it. He looked at me then. Really looked. The expression on his face was something I had not seen before. A grown man trying to hold something complex and painful and not quite managing to set it down or fully carry it. He said, "She was right." I said, "Yeah." He nodded. He took his coffee and went back upstairs. It was not forgiveness. It was not resolution. It was the first honest thing we had said to each other in months, and it was enough to stand on. I moved to the farm in April. I enrolled in the Sustainable Agriculture program at Harlan County Community College, which was a 2-year program and 12 miles from the farm. I arranged for Fig the barn cat to have the run of the place, a role he had already assumed independently. I repaired the fence section along the east pasture that had needed new posts since October. I planted the kitchen garden my grandmother had kept for 40 years. Tomatoes, kale, 2 rows of green beans and one of climbing peas along the old wire trellis. My grandfather had built so long ago I could not find a year for it. The neighbor across the road, a man named Ray Castillo, who had farmed the adjacent property for 30 years, came over the first week I was there with a chainsaw and a 2-hour lesson on the line of old oaks along the northern fence that needed thinning before winter. He did not charge me. He said Ruth would have done the same. I brought him a jar of last year's preserves my grandmother had put up, and we were square. Sandra Park called once more. That spring, she said, "Everything is in order. The property is in your name, the title is clean, and there is nothing pending against it." I said, "Thank you for everything you did." She said, "I just followed your grandmother's plan." I said, "She was thorough." She laughed. She said she was the most organized client I have ever had. She brought a binder to our first meeting with every document tabbed and labeled. That sounded exactly right. My father called me in June, unprompted, a Sunday morning while I was on the porch with coffee watching the east pasture in the early light the way I had gotten into the habit of doing. He said, "How is it up there?" I said, "Good. The green beans are coming in. East fence is holding." He said, "I always hated that east fence." I said, "The posts were rotten." He said they were rotten when I was 12. I said, "Grandpa kept patching them." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Quiet. Then can I come up sometime? Just to see it." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Come on the 4th. I will make dinner." He said, "Okay." He came on the 4th. He came alone without Belinda, which I thought was the right call, and which I think he thought too. He walked the property for an hour without saying much. He looked at the east fence I had fixed. He looked at the kitchen garden. He stood at the edge of the back pasture for a while looking at the sky. At dinner, he said, "She left me the pocket watch." I said, "I know." He said, "I have not been able to look at it." I said, "You do not have to look at it yet." He said, "No." We ate the rest of dinner quietly. When he left, he stopped at the door and looked at the wraparound porch, at the green shutters, at the way the barn sat back from the house at just the right angle to catch the afternoon light. He said, "She built this place right." I said, "She did." He hugged me, brief, awkward, the kind of hug from a father who has not hugged his daughter in a long time and is not entirely sure he has the right to, but does it anyway. He said, "I am glad you have it." I said, "Me too." He drove down the gravel lane and I stood on the porch and watched until the tail lights were gone. There's one more thing I want to tell you. The last thing my grandmother wrote in that letter, she wrote, "I want you to know that I am not giving you this farm as a burden. I'm giving it to you as proof. Proof that the things worth tending are worth protecting. Proof that doing the quiet work, the work nobody sees, the patching and the planting and the showing up every weekend when you could have been somewhere else, that work is not invisible. Someone is always watching. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, they plan for you." I have read that paragraph probably 40 times since April. I read it when I'm tired. I read it when I'm not sure I'm doing this right. I read it when I need to remember why it matters. I'm 19 years old and I own 63 acres in Harlan County and a farmhouse my great-grandfather built in 1947 and a barn with one large opinionated orange cat in it. I did not fight for this. I just showed up. I showed up every weekend for 6 years, and I cleaned the drawer, and I found the key. My grandmother planned for me. All I had to do was be the person she already knew I was. My father and I talk on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, not yet, but most. He asks about the farm. I tell him. Last week he asked if the fence along the road needed replacing, and I said not yet, and he told me exactly which post to watch going into winter. He still knows every inch of it. That does not go away. Belinda has not called again. I think that is probably the right amount of distance for right now. Maybe that changes? Maybe it does not. Some relationships need time before they can be renegotiated honestly. I am willing to give it time. Amber texted me last month. She said, "Can I come visit the farm sometime?" I said, "Anytime." She said, "Do you have animals?" I said, "One cat." She said, "Does he have a name?" I said, "Procedures." She said, "That is a terrible name." I said, "He did not get a vote." She came the following weekend. She spent 2 hours following Fig around the property and another hour helping me weed the kitchen garden, and she ate 3 bowls of the pasta I made for dinner and fell asleep on the couch before 9. I put a blanket over her and left the porch light on. That felt like family, the small, real kind. Here's what 6 years of Saturday mornings taught me. It taught me that presence is a form of proof. Every morning I showed up at that farm, I was building something my grandmother could see, not a performance, a record. The kind that does not require words because it exists in fence posts and weeded garden beds and pipes that do not freeze because someone ran the water. It taught me that the people who protect us are sometimes working quietly on our behalf long before we know we need protecting. My grandmother signed a deed on a Tuesday in October 2 years before she died, alone, with an attorney she chose specifically because she trusted her and not anyone else in the family. And she did not tell a soul. She just filed it. She just made it real, and then she went home and put a key under a drawer and trusted me to find it. It taught me that money changes the shape of people you thought you knew. Not always into monsters. Sometimes just into people who are scared and make choices from the fear instead of from the love. My father is not a monster. He is a man who was frightened and let someone else do the planning for him. That is not a crime, but it is a thing I will remember. And it taught me this. The thing I want to leave you with, the people who show up do not always get recognized in the moment. They do not always get the bigger bedroom or the new desk lamp or the acknowledgement at the dinner table. Sometimes they get the quiet work and the stuck drawer and the Saturday mornings where nobody is watching. But someone is always watching, and sometimes that someone plans for you. That is my story. A key taped under a drawer, a box behind the seed canisters, a letter that told me everything I needed to know about who I already was. If you have ever been the one who showed up quietly, who did the work without recognition, who stayed when everyone expected you to drift, I want you to know that work is not invisible. It is evidence. And evidence lasts. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Tell me if someone in your life prepared for you in a way you did not discover until later. Tell me if you are in the middle of something like this right now and what you're holding on to. Share this with someone who needs to hear that showing up matters, that the quiet work counts, that someone somewhere sees it. Subscribe if you have not yet. Still waters run deep. I will see you in the next one.